This is the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast with Cass Midgley and Marie Delafont.
We interview people you don't know about a subject no one wants to talk about. We hope to encourage people in the process of deconstructing their faith and help curb the loneliness that accompanies it. We think the world is a better place when more people live by sight, not by faith. Please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, you can support us monetarily in 2 easy ways. You can pledge
$1 million
or more through Patreon. That's patreon.com/EA podcast, or leave a lump sum donation through PayPal at our website, everyone'sagnostic.com. The smallest contribution is greatly appreciated.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 240 of the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast. I'm Cass Midgley. Keep in mind, someday, each and every one of us are going to fall asleep and never wake up. This podcast is free to all and free of ads. So, a big thanks to each and every one of our Patreon and PayPal supporters. Today, Marie Delafont and I talk with Dr. Darrel Ray. Dr. Ray is the founder of Recovering from Religion, just celebrating its 10-year anniversary, and the Secular Therapy Project. He's been a psychologist for over 40 years and is the author of 4 books, 2 on organizational teamwork, as well as 2 books that apply to this show, The God Virus, How Religion Infects Our Lives and Culture, and Sex and God, How Religion Distorts Sexuality. Dr. Ray has been a student of religion most of his life and holds a master's degree in religion, a bachelor's degree in Sociology, Anthropology, and a doctorate in Psychology. Before we get into our talk with Dr. Ray and Marie's announcements, accidents happen. No, they don't. Everything happens for a reason. Shit happens, then you die. No. Life is loaded with meaning and purpose. To the needy, insecure eye, nature looks like it's designed by someone. To the bold, honest eye, it's random chaos. Childish thinking needs things to go a certain way. Maturity adapts to what is. Nature doesn't know or care that we're here, and in more ways than one is trying to kill us. Ecclesiastes was right in that everything is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. There's nothing special about our lives. I know that's hard to hear, but there's no plan or purpose in which we fit or matter. It matters not who we married and what children we had. We could have married 1,000 other people and had thousands of other children. Whatever patterns we see are coincidence. John Green wrote, "It's hard to believe in coincidence, but it's even harder to believe in anything else." Bob Dylan said, "I accept chaos. I'm not sure whether it accepts me." Terence McKenna wrote, "Chaos is what we've lost touch with. This is why it is given a bad name. It is feared by the dominant archetype of our world, which is ego, which clenches because its existence is defined in terms of control." Unquote. Religions are all about control, right? Controlling other people, yeah, but primarily to give us the illusion that someone is in control. The more fearful a person you are, the more control you need to see and feel and have. As humans, we desperately need to believe that someone is in control. But I propose that clinging, that fear and denial of reality, that no saying to what is not only childish, but it's boring, empty, dry, lazy, and cowardly. Once you acknowledge that life is meaningless, chaotic, and random, it becomes truly amazing. When I was a Christian, I believed God made all this and was actually engaged and involved in earthly activities. But if that's true, let's be honest, he sucks at being God and is certainly not worthy of any admiration or worship. More like contempt. But releasing that need for someone to be in control and saying yes to chaos creates space for spontaneous, random creative moments to arise organically and land in our laps if we're paying attention. Kirsten Miller wrote, "All the most powerful emotions come from chaos. Fear, anger, love, especially love. Love is chaos itself. Think about it. Love makes no sense. It shakes you up and spins you around, and then eventually it falls apart." Unquote. Somerset Maugham wrote this, "I have an idea that the only thing which makes it possible to regard this world we live in without disgust is the beauty which now and then men create out of the chaos. The pictures they paint, the music they compose, the books they write, and the lives they lead. Of all these, the richest in beauty is the beautiful life. That is the perfect work of art." Unquote. All that makes me Cass Midgley, my body and all its shortcomings, my mind, my experiences, my talents, my flaws, etc., is all random sperm and ovum and DNA chaos. I am a work of art. My life is the playing out of a story unfolding before my eyes, moment by moment, day by day, year by year. No one's writing this story. It just is. I just am. You just are. And here we find ourselves. As time unrolls itself before me each day, each moment takes on a form with 1,000 variables. It could have gone 1,000 different ways, but this is how it went. Who's here? What's the weather? How am I feeling? What room am I in? What sounds are happening? What smells? Where am I? What are the odds that something nice or funny happens? And what happens the moment I start expecting something? What happens to me when I need things to go a certain way? I'm set up for disappointment. I get the scary sense that I'm not in control. Thus I'm small, maybe irrelevant, insignificant, worthless, invisible, meaningless. Well, yeah, I am all those things. To the universe, anything more is visions of grandeur. In the meantime, life is happening. It's passing right by me, and I'm going to miss it if I'm not present. If I'm in la-la land like a child, wishing things were different, I'm going to miss these magical moments. Anais Nin wrote, "In chaos there is fertility." Unquote. This is why I think art and religion are mutually exclusive. It may be why Christian music sucks. Certain sects of Islam forbid music, fiction, movies, dancing. This art and these expressions come out of chaos and point to chaos and create more chaos and create more art and expression. Fertility, life is bubbling out of chaos. Control stifles creativity. Religious people don't believe in accidents. This is partly why they're opposed to abortion. God made that baby and you're killing it. This offends God and delays his kingdom from coming on earth as it is in heaven. What they can't acknowledge is everyone is an accident. Everything is an accident. Nothing happens for a reason. We're not special. No baby is special. No creature is special. No pope has special powers. No prophet, no magician, no doctor, no animal. Nothing is special. All of it is meaningless goo, atoms formed together to make matter, some of which gain consciousness, but no more special than your coffee table. But how severe is this human need to believe that we're special? The Christian fight against abortion is driven by this need, the need to ignore that accidents happen and inject all things, including these babies, with this giant fictional narrative that makes us feel a part of something real. Ironically, that's actually another example of art and fiction coming out of chaos. Religions and master narratives are humans doing their thing, creating art out of chaos. And it'd be beautiful if it weren't taken so seriously. That's really it, isn't it? The source of all evil is a lack of comedy. The taking of all this shit too serious. If there's an afterlife reward for the game of life, I believe it will go to the laughers, to the mockers and scoffers, because they didn't fall for it. They didn't try to escape the inescapable or control the uncontrollable. Yeah, civil society needs laws and boundaries, but as individuals who find themselves in the real world and have said yes to it, we do what religionists cannot. We release control of others. We live and let live. Our moral code is simple. Do no harm and respect other people's autonomy. Consider the danger to society when people feel deputized to control other people's lives because they know it would please their invisible friend. We'll always have such mental illnesses in our midst, but I shudder to think if such people were ever elevated to positions of power and influence. Oh yeah, that's now. In order for otherwise good people with unseared consciences to be tricked into doing such evil, they must feel good about themselves doing it. So they use terms like pro-life while actually being pro-death, pro-war, pro-capital punishment, pro-assault rifles, etc. But preborn fetuses are easy objects to champion. As Dave Barnhart puts it, the unborn are a convenient group of people to advocate for. They never make demands of you. They are morally uncomplicated, unlike the incarcerated, addicted, or the chronically poor. They don't resent your condescension or complain that you are not politically correct. And unlike widows, they don't ask you to question patriarchy. Unlike orphans, they don't need money, education, or childcare. Unlike aliens, they don't bring all their racial, cultural, and religious baggage that you dislike. The unborn allow you to feel good about yourself without any work at creating or maintaining relationships. And when they're born, you can forget about them because they cease to be unborn. You can love the unborn and advocate for them without substantially challenging your own wealth, power, or privilege, without reimagining social structures, apologizing, or making reparations to anyone. They are, in short, the perfect people to love if you want to claim you love Jesus, but actually dislike people who breathe. Prisoners, immigrants, the sick, the poor, widows, orphans, all the groups that are specifically mentioned in the Bible, they all get thrown under the bus for the unborn." Unquote. Now, mind you, Dave Barnhart is a Methodist minister, and it's proof that Christianity has yet to corrupt all its adherents. We taped this conversation on May 12th, 2019. The intro music is Just Groove Me by Dave Weckl. The segue music is by Sam Mayer on a handpan in the New York City subway. Thanks for listening, and be a yes-sayer to what is.
Before we dive into our interview with Dr. Darrel Ray, I feel like some context is in order. I'm just going to go ahead and fangirl the fuck out here for a few minutes. So now, some of you may know my history and some of you might not, but most of you know that I am a depraved sexual deviant who dares to have 3 ethical and romantic relationships all at the same time. I haven't always been, though. Content warning, I will be discussing my sexual trauma history. I grew up during the true love waits purity culture flare-up of the 90s, where anything outside of heterosexual married sex was viewed as a sin and actions that would reduce your value. So, unsurprisingly, I had sexual repression issues as I grew up. A fear of interacting with those I am attracted to, a strict suppression of any lust feelings, profound self-hatred if I strayed from purity by masturbating or doing cyber sex. It was the 90s. Releasing religion in my mid-20s did very little to remedy this trauma that was already soaked into my being. My sexual relationship with my first husband was unremarkable. I started being physical with him as a rebellion against how I was raised. Then everything after that I just let happen to me. I figured it was already dirty and rebellious enough that I was just having sex. I didn't imagine that there could be enjoyment or connection too. We started fighting within a year of being married, and as a consequence, I never really wanted to have sex with him. I also had an eating disorder that was brewing hardcore, which caused me to gain weight. And I can't forget that day in my parents' backyard where he told me he wasn't sexually attracted to me anymore. Unsurprisingly, my first husband and I divorced 5 years after we married. And then I met my current partner in 2010. And we started a sexual relationship.
And at first, I didn't really have any challenges. The new relationship energy with him was very intoxicating, and we enjoyed our sexuality together. Yet, as time went by and my relationship energy kind of settled down, I started to feel really emotionally safe with him. And that's when my sexual trauma really started showing up. So many times he would reach out to be sexual with me, and then I would curl up into the fetal position, unable to talk, unable to think, just entirely shut down. The panic would settle in, and I would leave from the bedroom, go into the kitchen, grab onto the counter, and start heaving, sobbing, wailing, unable to catch my breath. And in retrospect, I think I was panicked about the shame and fear of what does it mean about me that I don't want to have sex. I was sure that if I started admitting how I felt about sex, that my partner would leave me. So I wouldn't talk about it, and when I did let it bubble to the surface, it was inarticulate and pure panic. I had absolutely no idea what to do. I was terrified, and I internalized it all and was concerned that no one would love me if I didn't like having sex. So I decided to seek help. I saw a medical doctor who specialized in sexual health, and I was tested for a number of conditions, but nothing showed up. I even saw a therapist who specialized in sexual health and found that to be unhelpful. He wanted us to be temporarily abstinent and focus on sensate experiences. And if you've listened to my last monologue, you know that being present with my sensations is not something that's ever been easy for me. So I just went back to being resigned to being a worthless wife who was scared to have sex with her own husband. So in about 2015, I found myself with more emotional space and strength to start working through my religious trauma. I started seeking out resources aggressively. I came across Life After God with Ryan Bell, and then that's how I learned about Everyone's Agnostic with Cass Midgley. Don't know if you've heard of him. At the same time, I was seeking resources for my sexual trauma. I was particularly excited when I ran across a podcast specifically aimed at talking about sexuality in an entirely secular way. That's right, it was Secular Sexuality with Dr. Darrel Ray. And I found it to be so refreshing to hear someone talk about sexuality as it relates to our culture's toxic notions of it, notions from our puritanical roots. Finally, someone understood and had some answers. I listened to so many episodes, but Darrel kept on bringing up polyamory. I was really weirded out. I remember writing him off as a dirty old man. I felt really judgmental, and I figured polyamorous people were just sex-crazed freaks, which now I wonder, why is that a bad thing? But I wrote into Darrel and I offered to tell my story. I recorded it, and it aired on episode 27 in 2015. It was under the pseudonym April. And it was the first time I spoke of my sexual trauma. Shortly after, I asked Cass if I could be a guest on Everyone's Agnostic. And then boom, I was on episode 108, talking about my deconversion. Shortly after that is when my husband and I decided to explore ethical non-monogamy. Darrel had gotten into my head with his dirty old man poly nonsense. So just like I had asked myself why Christianity was true, I had to ask myself, why is non-monogamy the norm? I found no answer and instead found adventure and freedom as I met my boyfriend Snacks and later my other boyfriend Dateboy. The personal growth that I've gone through in the last 2.5 years cannot be summarized in a monologue, cannot be summarized into an episode. Becoming poly has given me an opportunity to deconstruct and rebuild my sexuality, among other things. It's opened my mind to true morality, the morality of consent, and mutual respect of autonomy. I invited myself back onto Cass's show because I wanted to give him a little update. So I baited him and I mentioned that I was becoming poly, and boom, obviously, I was put on episode 180. And then my husband started to date too, and I found myself confronting my own insecurities. I reached out to Darrel, and he interviewed me on episode 85 of Secular Sexuality, and then again with my entire polycule on episode 89. In the fall of 2018, I got to travel to Kansas and meet Darrel Ray and share a glass of wine with him and talk about whatever. It was such an honor, given how much his work has impacted me. That same fall, I met Cass, and we hit it off, and I asked to join his team. He might tell the story differently, though. So if it weren't obvious by now, I'm the co-host of Everyone's Agnostic, a podcast that has meant so much to me for years. And then very recently, I, Marie Delafonte, the co-host of Everyone's Agnostic, now a self-described sex and death nerd, got to interview Dr. Darrel Ray on Cass's and my show. So if in this episode I stumble around a bit, it's because of the full circle of this journey that I have been on that is just beyond words for me. And I find myself speechless and deeply grateful for those who have supported me. And I'm profoundly proud of my own bravery and relentless pursuit of authenticity. I really hope you enjoy this discussion. This whole episode means so much to me. Nolite te bastardes carborundorum. So if that wasn't enough polyamory information for you, you should be on the lookout for Your Atheist Pastor. It's another podcast that I was recently a guest on. It hasn't been released yet, but me and Luke King recorded yesterday, May 16th. And so that'll be out later on. And we talk a lot about polyamory and just basically ethical non-monogamy. So be on the watch out for that. And also check out his show in the meantime. He's awesome. Also, if you are looking to throw away your money and tell people what you think, we've got some stickers that say yes to what is if you want to order them. We also have magnets. You can find them on everyone'sagnostic.com. And if you become a Patreon supporter, you get some for free. So what's up with that? And if you want to contact us, you can shoot us an email at everyone'sagnostic@gmail.com. And also, if you want to become more involved in our community, you can ask to be added to our private Facebook group, or our virtual support group, and or our sexuality discussion group. So to stay informed, you can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I put some ridiculous stuff up there, so you might just want to go there for that. I also want to say hello to our listeners in South Africa, and they speak Afrikaans. Dank je dat jij luistert en ja se wat is. So thanks, guys. Thanks, South Africa. And now, on to our interview with the infamous sex deviant, Dr. Darrel Ray. Darrel, you and I go back about 4 years now.
We do. We're old friends.
When I was starting to actively work on recovering from religion, and then also specifically diving into recovering sexually from religious indoctrination. And then I found your podcast, Secular Sexuality, and I found it to be extremely refreshing, even though there were a few episodes where you got into your polyamory, which made me very uncomfortable.
Well, now you know how all our listeners feel.
I do. I do empathize. It's gross. It's it's uncomfortable. But yeah, I found your show and I found it to be a very safe haven and just so refreshing to have those discussions, specifically talking about it in a secular way, specifically processing the religious way that we were affected. And so I ended up reaching out to you because you were having a competition, not a competition, but you were kind of have like a listener participation thing where we could tell our stories. And so I wrote up my story and I sent it to you and you were like, yeah, I'd love to have you on the show. So I recorded it. And anyway, long story short, I was on episode 27, 85, and 89.
Yeah, you have the distinction of being on my podcast more than anybody else.
Is that right?
Yep, that's true.
Well, how do you like that? And so then you and I got to meet in September at your party. And then that's just when all hell broke loose. And then shortly after, I became part of Everyone's Agnostic. And now you are on my show.
Right. You defected to the dark side.
I did.
Wait a second. How am I dark?
Well, I'm going to explain that to you here, Cass. I've been waiting. You don't know how long I've been waiting to be on your show.
Oh, it's fantastic.
I want to challenge the fundamental assumptions that you have with your show, Everyone's Agnostic.
Okay.
Ooh.
And we're going to start this way. I absolutely defy that. I am not agnostic. I am a deep, profound believer. I speak to my Lord and Savior every day, and he tells me to masturbate. And the Flying Spaghetti Monster instructs me on how to eat my pasta. And so I'm just telling you, you have screwed up.
Yeah.
The very fundamentals of your podcast just don't ring true with me. So there you go.
Okay. It's been nice talking to you.
Cass, Darrel has a point. I've decided I'm converting, and so I'm leaving the show. Sorry. Bye.
Okay.
Well, okay. Now there's a second point of contention here. You know how Muslims have to go to Mecca to be a good Muslim,
Yeah.
and atheists have to come to my party to be a true atheist. And you've never came.
I know.
We'd love to have you here.
Yeah, I would love to see you.
We have
And
to put up with Marie, but we'd love to have you.
yeah, well, so I think I have a little, Marie, you got to share your Darrel Ray story. My first exposure to you, Darrel, was you came to Vanderbilt to speak, and I at the time worked at Vanderbilt, and I was there at that lecture, and I was, I was pretty far out as far as how long I'd been out of Christianity. But I just want to say, and I know that both of you are going to be able to concur with this, is that the strands and the tentacles of Christian influence on my personal sexuality were still there. And you brought it out by your opening statement on that lecture was you got up and you said something along the lines of, okay, raise your hand if you masturbate.
Right.
And I mean, I'm a masturbating fool, but I've never admitted it in a public setting like that, And so, and here's the other thing is there was I'm there by myself, and there's people sitting around me by themselves. And there was a lovely blonde woman sitting by herself a few rows back from me. I mean, like one row back and two seats over. And she's raising her hand, and all of a sudden I'm imagining her masturbating. And it turns out it was Gail Jordan. And so, and she's lovely, and we're friends. We both lived in Murfreesboro for years. She's been on my show several times. But that's a little bit of the background of how uncomfortable I was at your lecture. And I just want to, here's one of my favorite words. Even when I was whether I was a high school teacher, which I was a preacher, is the word stretch. I love to be stretched, and I love to stretch people. It's kind of that prophetic thing where they say, afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted.
Yeah, right.
And so you stretched me that day, and I'm grateful. But at the time, I wasn't grateful. I was being stretched, and so it hurt.
Well, you were not the only one. In that very room, there was a PhD psychologist that was sitting in that room who had driven quite a ways to hear me speak. And when I asked that question, he could not raise his hand.
You're watching him?
He called me up sometime after that and said, that question blew my mind because I couldn't get my hand up. And I should... Yeah, so it's really interesting. I've been doing that now for 10 years, asking people right at the very beginning of my talks if they masturbate. And I can tell if there's Catholics in the group because they get up and walk out about that same time.
Yeah. But you're exposing the shame associated with it, and everybody does it.
Everybody does it, and nobody wants to admit it. Mm-hmm. My mentor, Albert Ellis, was fond of saying 97% of all men will admit to masturbating in therapy, and the other 3% are lying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now I don't know the stats on that. I'm sure it's not too far off for women too.
Yeah.
But the reason I do that, as you know, Cass, is because I think how long you've been out of religion.
Oh, it was a slow process, but I probably gave myself the A word about 8 or 9 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Atheist.
Okay. Right. Well, even people who've been out for that long still are infected with notions of that.
Well, yeah, and that lecture was like 3 years ago, so it was, it was a while back. I'd raise both my hands if you came to my town and lectured today. So
if you had any hands
Hell,
free at the time,
I might flip it out and masturbate just in front of everyone just to show that I do. That's how unashamed I am.
And a teacher's pet too. You'd be like, I'm masturbating right now, Darrel.
Yeah, a teacher's pet. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Look, Darrel, how am I doing?
Hey, pictures or it didn't happen. I'm just saying.
Yeah. So I guess I want to go back and I want to talk about the books that you've written, just so that our listeners can hear their titles, and then what your credentials are, and what are the areas that you've served as far as helping people psychologically.
Oh gosh. Well, I've been actually, if we go back in time, I got my doctorate there at Vanderbilt.
Oh, nice.
Peabody College at Vanderbilt University.
Huh.
I got my EDD in counseling psychology.
Mm-hmm.
But before that, the whole reason I was in Nashville, I went to Nashville in 1972 and to go to seminary. I was going to Scarrett College for Christian Workers because I wanted to be a minister to help people.
Well, see, that's my next question is I wanted to know if you had a Christian background, and there it is.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
And after 2 years of seminary, of Scarrett College, I realized I didn't believe quite the way I thought I did. And I pretty much ended up a super liberal Christian for another 10 or 12 years after that until I got divorced. And getting divorced helped me just move on down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But my books are the God Virus. Actually, I've written 4 books, but the 2 you're most interested in are The God Virus, How Religion Infects Our Lives and Culture, and Sex and God is the second one, or the 4th book, How Religion Distorts Sexuality. So those are the 2. But I practice first as a counseling psychologist and then as a clinical psychologist for about 10 years. And then I moved on to organizational psychology, and I did that for about 30 years. And then I'm retired now. But I really enjoy helping people, and in whatever capacity I was, whether it was counseling or clinical or organizational, I always tried to invent and find ways, techniques and methods that would help people grow faster and better and achieve their goals and that sort of thing.
Awesome. That's a great work. And there's probably thousands of people that you've stretched, so to speak, and helped. And I just want to applaud your work.
Yeah, you've ruined my life. I'm poly now. It's all your fault.
I took those skills that I had as organizational psych. That's what helped me decide after the God Virus came out to start recovering from religion. And that's currently what it seemed like my full-time job, although I don't get paid for it.
And here again, that's a great work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do. I have a question, Darrel. In other episodes in the past, we've made sure to, sometimes we forget, but we ask our listeners a question. And what is what you're most proud of in your life in terms of all these accomplishments? Like, you've done so many cool things. I'm curious, what is the thing that you are the most proud of?
Along this line, because I'm damn proud.
Any line. I don't.
Well, I'm proud that I've climbed 45 of the highest mountains in the continental U.S. So that's
what?
Proud.
Damn.
35?
45.
45.
4 or 5. Yeah.
Jesus
45.
Christ.
Yeah. And every summer I go out and I climb mountains. So.
Yeah, he's a fitness nut.
Well, I'm not a fitness nut, but I'm a nut. I would agree with that.
The nut part.
I stay in good shape because I want to climb my mountains, and
yeah,
and I just love getting on the top of a 14,000 foot mountain. It's just there's nothing quite like it.
Wow.
Wow.
That's what I'm physically proud of. But
Sure.
in terms of professional and emotional, there's nothing in my life I've done that I'm more thrilled with than recovering from religion. It's every day I wake up and I spend the first 2 or 3 hours of my day dealing with recovering from religion kinds of stuff. I would have never dreamed I'd be doing this. I'm retired. Why am I spending all that time? And it's because it's one of the few times in my life I can say virtually everything I do has a direct positive impact on somebody else.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, that's not 100% true. I mean, I'm sure I've made mistakes and I fucked up a few times, I'm sure. But on the whole, even as a psychologist, I don't walk in my office and after a session feel like I've necessarily helped the client sitting in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And yet with recovering from religion, we've got somewhere around 50 volunteers. And what I look at is how am I helping facilitate those people in helping other people? And of course, Marie, you know all about that because you were one of the volunteers. And Cass, you stole her from us.
So for those who don't know, can you clarify what recovering from religion is?
Well, we are an international organization that started exactly 10 years ago, last month. Our mission is to help people deal with the consequences of leaving any religion. Could be Islam, could be Mormonism, Baptist, Hindu, we don't care. We'll help you with the consequences because when you leave a religion, you deal with the psychological, the social, the emotional, the financial. I mean, there's just so many things that can hit you as a result of that. We're now on, I think, 4 continents and 8 or 9 countries. And we've got volunteers in almost that same number of countries. And volunteers in all those countries. And we have callers and chatters that chat in through our chat line at recoveringfromreligion.org. You can just go there and hit the chat button. And we have chatters chatting in from literally almost every major country on the planet, except China. We don't get anything from China. I think it's because of internet restrictions. But we get chats from Saudi Arabia, which are dangerous. And we actually have some protocols about that. But Tunisia, Australia, Thailand, you name it, we probably had a chat from one of those countries. And of course, lots of chats in the United States and Canada and Mexico. We're English-based only at this time, but we do have a Spanish channel we're trying to build up on.
Yeah, so Darrel, you may know Todd Yoder. He's here in this area.
Yeah,
he's moving to Nashville.
Yeah,
he works. He volunteers for you, and there's a very progressive Christian festival in North Carolina. I think it is South Carolina, called the Wild Goose Festival every summer, and it's a progressive Christian thing. And he just applied to get a table. Maybe I'm telling you something you already know, but I just want to say it to the world that you guys are having a table there at that festival. And I think that's, just finding places where you can touch people's lives. But the thing that I found most amazing recently talking to Todd about your numbers and about what goes on is that not only are you not able to take, because of just the sheer number of people wanting to call and or chat, that even with 50 volunteers, there's a good percentage of those calls and chats that you just can't field because of the sheer volume. And it's been increasing every month, if I'm not mistaken, since you started 10 years ago.
Yep.
So this is a sign that people, my show, I've been on the air almost 5 years, and I noticed that, people that write into Marie and I, they're like, I just started listening last month, Yeah,
right.
And they're just getting started on their deconversion, whereas Marie and I are 10 years out and it's kind of old hat for us to some degree, but I just know this, to be true. It resonates. Obviously the numbers are there.
Yeah.
But more and more people are deciding and coming into some clarity and maybe even a field of vision that just says, you know what, I don't think I'd buy all this anymore. And they begin that process of trusting themselves and trusting their own critical thinking for the first time maybe since they were a child.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love it. We the three of us here in this room are in this work because of how much it's helping people and how toxic religion is for society and for individuals and for relationships. And I'm just pardon me if I pat ourselves on the back for a second, but I love this work. I love what you're doing. I love what we're doing. And I'm overwhelmed with just the beauty of helping people to the degree in which we're doing this. And who fucking knew? Who knew that it would be on this end of the spectrum? In fact, Dave Warnock and I were talking the other day, and he was on a podcast because he's jumping around doing podcasts right now like a madman because of Marie. and there was this podcast where there was like 6 or 7 guys on the line from all over the world. And so Dave's being interviewed by 6 guys at a time, and the conversation's invigorating, and they get to the end, and they're done taping, and they make some kind of joke about how one of the guys on the line is still a Christian. He's like, I'm sure he's just barely a Christian, but enough to where everybody was joking about it. He's still a Christian, and because Dave and I both have this background as pastors, back if we were at a summer camp and we found one person that wasn't a Christian yet, what would we say? We can take care of that right here now. All you got to do is say the sinner's prayer. We can take care of that right here now.
Yep.
Now Dave was a lot more Southern than I am, so I'm more quoting him on that. But we started to set out to write the unsinner's prayer or something to where we can reverse the curse. And obviously the first line is, Jesus, I ask you to get out of my heart.
Get out.
Oh my gosh. And I'm just saying, who knew that we'd be on this end of the thing, actually saying that the moral high ground is non-theism, non-supernaturalism. Yeah. The best way to emotional health is to trust yourself, to love yourself, to like yourself, to embrace what it means to be human, and to join the human race, and to plant your feet on the ground and start believing science and resonating with what is, and find a community of people that aren't exclusive to gays or whatever. And here we find ourselves. I just think it's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I love it that Todd is, we actually named Todd just last week as our director of the entire helpline.
Wow.
He's fucking awesome.
Yeah. He's really doing a great job. And then he's going to do this thing in North Carolina. We're just thrilled with that. That's totally new territory for us.
Yeah. Can you talk about the retreat that you guys have planned? Yeah,
we're doing a retreat in September, and it's a little different angle than what you guys, but I love what you guys are doing. I think that's super. And I think we ought to be having retreats every month somewhere in the United States.
I've said it before.
Yeah. Yeah, we're doing a retreat in the foothills of North Carolina in September 20th, around September 20th. And we're going to be, we have a theme. It's called Reconnect with Your Nature. The issues around how religion just kind of disconnects you from your sexuality, disconnects you from nature itself. Mm-hmm. When you see a sunrise, you think God made that sunrise. No, it's the rotation of the earth. We're going to have some minor programming. We're not going to do a lot of programming, but we'll have an astronomer there. I'm going to take some people up on a hike, and we'll look at plants and look at botanicals and evolution, and and we'll have 4 psychotherapists on there who are all volunteers from the Secular Therapy Project. And
God, that sounds fantastic.
I know.
So people can just, if you want to sit down and talk to a therapist about your fear of hell or something, you'll be able to do that. But I think the main benefit of what we're going to be doing and what you guys already are doing is just talking to each other and kind of decompressing from all the other stuff.
So beautiful.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
So I have a question for people who are hearing about this retreat and maybe thinking like I am, where I know that when I approached our retreat last year before I became a part of the team here on the podcast, that I found it all to be a bit triggering. And that was even when there was no programming at all, except for like a few check-ins and stuff. Have you guys thought about that? Like how to strike that balance between creating a space where there's some programming to grow and to learn without that kind of triggering, how do you say
This
it?
feels like church.
Kind of, yeah. Have you thought about that, or how are you going to manage that?
Oh yeah, we have thought about that. Yeah, it's definitely one of the first things we started thinking about.
Yeah.
Well, that's why one of the reasons we have the psychotherapists on hand, not because they're going to do therapy, but we're gonna let people just talk in small groups about whatever they want to talk about, to each other about what they want to talk about. We're going to have we're going to teach some relaxation stuff. Guided imagery. We have a good therapist coming in from Raleigh, Durham is going to do that. But we're also saying you don't have to go to anything. You can go out and meditate. We don't care.
Yeah.
And we're going to have a musical thing. We're going to have a wine and cheese tasting. So, it's going to be very loose. The programming is not, we're doing everything we can to make sure it has no triggering or minimizes that.
Yeah.
Because we're very aware of it. And I appreciate what you're saying there. We've actually had some people who've registered for the retreat, and it was one of their questions. I don't want to come there and get triggered. So
yeah. I know that if I were to go, I would show up and I would find the leader and I'd be like, I'm at your fucking retreat, but I'm not going to do anything I don't want to do. Like,
we don't care.
Yeah.
And then you wouldn't care.
You don't have to go to anything. You can sleep all day. We don't care.
Yeah.
As long as okay, we don't
That's
care.
beautiful.
Well, there's got to be a curfew and bed checks though at some point. I mean, do you have separate swim times, Darrel? Come on now. Also, if you're going to go on hikes, I think that maybe you should find somebody with some experience instead of yourself to take to do those hikes. That sounds scary. 45 mountains. That's that's child's play. You need to find an expert.
Well, I haven't done Everest. I haven't done McKinley.
See, you're not qualified.
I've talked to Todd, and Todd just loved what you guys did last year, and we're not trying to duplicate it. We're just trying to do our own thing.
Yeah.
I wouldn't care if you were. It's a great thing. And you know what? Now that you mention it, I did plug that a couple episodes back because Gail sent me a copy of the details.
And my opinion is that if someone listens to this and they were thinking like before today, they were like, oh yeah, I really want to go to the Everyone's Agnostic retreat. And then they listened to this and they're like, oh wait, I want to go to the Recovering from Religion retreat. I would be like, oh my God, yes, please go to the one that really calls to you, even if we don't get you. Like we were talking before the recording, Darrel, like I have no fucks to give about where people get their resources, where they get their support. And so the more that we can build each other up in terms of those of us who are doing deconversion support activism, the more that we can build each other up, the better, I think, because people are going to glom on to relate to different resources differently. I don't want to try to block people from seeing other resources when those would be more helpful than listening to me.
Well, we're not in competition.
Right.
I think you've heard from Todd, if not from me, that you guys are like the number one podcast referral we make.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Well, and you guys have your own podcast too, right?
Yeah, we have our own podcast, but we've probably sent more people to your podcast than we have to our own. Of course, you've been going longer than we have. So
yours is just restarted, as I understood.
Right. But nevertheless, we don't really care. You guys are a great resource for what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
Well, and on that point, I just want to note, because I'm writing a piece right now where I'm trying to focus on some of the things that have made, because here I find myself on the other side. Like my life is better than ever. I'm happier than ever. I'm healthier than ever than I was when I was a Christian. And yet when I was a Christian, I could not imagine a life void of God. Yeah. Jesus was my best friend. And so you take him away and you just, there's nothing. And yet I find myself on the other side of that excursion, just elated with how much I'm free and how, and all these things. And I wanted to get specific. I want to highlight one specific here is that my experience in Christianity in pastoral roles and in going to conferences and going to pastors' conferences and different things, that I ran into a lot of egos and I ran into a lot of competitive type, environments. And I just want to say that, here in this world, I've run into less egos, if any, less politics, and no competition because of just how much we just don't give a fuck about who gets glory or credit.
Yeah.
We're just helping people.
Yeah. Well, speaking of glory and credit, I hope your listeners will take a minute to go look at the videos that Seth Andrews did that just were released the last 2 weeks.
Okay, where's that?
Well, you can see them on his podcast, right, at The Thinking Atheist, but it's also on YouTube.
10 years ago, Dr. Darrel Ray had a germ of an idea. He recognized that there was a need for people to have a place and time to unpack some of the baggage that accompanies religion in a nutshell. This germ of an idea now 10 years later has evolved into an organization. Our main driver is how can we help so many of us. Number one, Recovering from Religion is an entirely volunteer organization. Darrel, me, the newest trained volunteer, because most of us have experienced what it is we're trying to help people with. And we all think, what would this have meant to us? So often when people reach out to Recovering from Religion on the helpline, the telephone call, they're at a crisis. They're at a crisis point, and those of us who have separated from religion understand what that moment is. And just to have a listening ear on the other end of the line so they can spill it out, and all of the emotions, sometimes for some of us, that transition is seismic. Everything is going to change, and they're on the beginning edge of what to them, if we remember, feels like a cliff. It doesn't feel like now what we feel, that it's walking into light and to warmth and to sunshine. At the time, their life is going to end or change or be dramatic, and it's not a happy place. We have to recognize, and we at Recovering from Religion do, there is a grieving process that accompanies leaving religion. We can't be all unicorns and rainbows. We have to acknowledge there are some losses. We have loss of community. We have loss of security, of being loved by an eternal parent that loves us so much that they would die for us, or whatever the image is. The loss of that in the beginning, it is tremendous. And so we have to remember that when people call in and they're in this crisis, we don't want to rush them. We don't want to say, oh, it's going to be fine and everything's so much better on this side. We know that it's most of the time better on this side. There's more light and air and space on this side. But we don't need to rush them through that. We have to respect the grief. We have to respect the process. Part of the training that our agents go through is that sensitivity to that one of the things that we train them to do, we are not a deconversion process. We zealously guard that reputation. Number one, that's what religion does, so we don't want to do that. We're trying to teach them critical thinking. We're trying to teach them the resources and how to find the answers. But number two, we market ourselves to the religious community. We guard the reputation of not being a deconversion process because we don't want the word to get out. Don't call those people, they'll just talk you out of your religion. There have been clients that have called in, and then we hear from them again months later. They're still kind of stuck. They're in their place. That's their process. That's their schedule. That's their journey. So we try to respect that, at the same time providing for them resources so that they can own their lives and they can own their questions and they can own their future. And so as we have clients call in and they share with us, there's nothing new under the sun. The trauma that you and I experienced and the questions we had and the relationships that were fractured, those are all going to be parts of this process. And so having a sensitivity to that, being prepared to offer resources about different things. We have a specific resource about coming out. We have a specific resource about the lingering fear of hell when they've discarded everything else, but that one little piece is keeping them awake. So that's a tiny little photograph of what Recovering from Religion Helpline does. And I mentioned fractured relationships. Actually, fractured relationships is the number one reason that people reach out to recovering from religion. I think the greater secular community's trying to do that. We're trying to build communities. I'll give a plug to Oasis and Sunday Assembly. Recovering from religion, we have support groups in place in some cities. When we have a dedicated volunteer, we have actual people with skin on meeting at a library and trying to be a resource. In addition to that, sometimes, as we all know, in the process, before someone even gets ready to be in public, to even go to an Oasis or a Sunday Assembly or one of our support group meetings, they're not even ready for that. And so we've created an online community. So that's a tiny little photograph of what Recovering from Religion Helpline does. It's the most gratifying work I've ever done. And I mentioned that we're all volunteers. I continue to take calls and chats, even as the executive director, because it keeps me grounded. It reminds me of why we do what we do. It motivates me and inspires me to do even more, to be more places, because we have become such a resource for people who are struggling. If you're in a place where you're struggling with issues of doubt and non-belief, if you have this sensation, you have these nagging, annoying questions that won't go away, and you're trying to ignore them, you're trying to pray them away, you're trying to beg God to respond to you, to take away the turmoil and the doubt, my response to you, the first thing I want to say is that you're not alone. There are so many people that are in the same place. And the second thing I want to say is the reason that you're having those feelings is because you're right. Because you're right to doubt and to question and to wonder if there's not a better way. And so my hope for you, my compassion for you is be patient with yourself. Let yourself, deep breath, let yourself ask the questions. It's okay. Ask the questions. Don't rush it. Find some resources. Of course, Recovering from Religion is one I would point you to first. You will probably find that there's maybe even someone in your area that you can speak to. Maybe there's a support group in your area, a Recovering from Religion support group, where you don't have to go and tell your whole story. You don't have to go and cry. You don't have to go and make a decision about where you are. You're just in the middle of it. You're just questioning. You're just doubting. And that's so strong. That's so solid. That's so all right. And so I wish someone had said that to me. I wish someone had metaphorically embraced me and said, it's okay. It's all right. And you don't have to rush. And you don't have to decide right now. Let yourself ask the questions.
He, of course, just does amazing work as a videographer, video producer, I guess you say. And he did it. He just came up and said, "Hey, can I do this for you?" And we said, "Hell yeah!" If you had to pay for that, it would have been thousands for sure.
Yeah. Easily.
And,
awesome.
And he just volunteered to do it for us. We're thrilled with it. But it's really good. Gail's own testimony, as you know, Cass. She's an amazing person with an amazing story.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and speaking of Gail and all this talk about me stealing Marie from you, you stole Gail from me, motherfucker.
Whoa!
Because she was right here in Murfreesboro.
Well,
of course, she's not in your town anymore, though. So, I mean, it's not like you took her to your town, but
There's a lot of talk about men stealing women as property right now.
Hey, good point. Good point.
I would tell you how I feel about that, but as property, I don't feel like I have much to say.
Just chattel. Well, that brings me up. I have on my list of questions for Darrel. That crosses over to the Me Too movement, and here's the thing about Marie turned me on to this book called The Ethical Slut.
Oh yeah,
I'm sure you're familiar.
Yeah.
And it really changed my life, and I highly recommend it. It's written by psychologists. It's written by women, and the audiobook is read by the authors, and so it's a fantastic experience, and it'll stretch you just like Darrel's work does. And there's just so much historically, and especially because it's baked in Christianity and Puritanism or whatever came over on the ships, and that is that if you're going to be a person who has sex with more than one person, or outside of marriage, or that you even enjoy sex, that somehow makes you a slut, that makes you promiscuous, that makes you somehow bad and dirty and sinful, and so all of that obviously needs to get cleaned up and clarified in our hearts and minds, and that's a remapping of the brain in some cases. So that might take, you might have to read that book 2 or 3 times, or just sit under this type of Darrel's teaching and such to let those, give yourself time to accept your own sexuality, et cetera, et cetera. Like, for example, when I went to your lecture at Vanderbilt, and this was pre, I still had a lot of sexual influence by Christianity still lingering in my brain, and so in complete and honest transparency, my first take of you, my first experience of you, just sitting there watching you and interacting and talking, not only from the lecture stand but the way you interacted with people, I was like, this guy's shady. And I'm serious. And I was like, he wants to fuck every woman in the room. And I know I was projecting. But that's okay. But I guess what I'm saying is how have you experienced and how have you handled, or just in general, your perspective on this movement where women are saying, hey, consent right now is everything, it seems like.
Right.
And whereas before, I think we gave ourselves a lot more permission to just experiment. So I put my hand on a woman's shoulder, and then I'll figure out by her reaction how she feels about that, versus the Me Too movement that says, no, you ask me before you put your hand on my shoulder, and it becomes a more verbal exchange rather than a physical exchange. And, are we, for a while that's going to be a stretch and then uncomfortable for people because we're walking on eggshells, maybe to some degree, because we're learning this new way. But what are your thoughts and feelings overall of this transition and how it relates to us ex-Christians, understanding our sexuality and understanding the woman's right and dominion over our own body?
Everyone's rights. Me Too is not just about women.
Right.
Right, but I would beg somebody to put their hand on my shoulder and no, I'm just kidding.
I have been blown away by the Me Too movement. I love it. I think it's been a breath of fresh air in forcing people to really reevaluate what it means to be in relation to each other, and what are boundaries. We've had discussions about boundaries between men and women, and more than just that, ever since the Me Too movement got going. So I've seen lots and lots of positive. Mm-hmm. And the negative, if there is any negative, is generally because people are having a hard time wrapping their head around the notion of people have boundaries and the right to enforce those boundaries.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I was raised, men were the head of the house and the women were supposed to do what they were told, kind of bullshit.
Right.
That's the way Christians are raised. Even today, all the Christian purity culture stuff is there. So coming out, I think what I see in the secular movement is, and I think the Me Too has impact on the secular movement, and it's forced us to recognize we're still infected with notions of power dynamics between men and women that come out of Christianity.
You think?
And going back to Marie, or what she said earlier about poly and what you said about the ethical slut, and there's several other books, of course.
Sure.
And that is, I am watching the polyamory movement explode in the United States. In fact, right here in Kansas City, where I live, we have a poly group in this town that started about 6 or 7 years ago, and it has over 1,000 members in it right now. 1,000 people who are openly poly on a meetup group. That's crazy. I would have never believed that. But if you look at who are the leaders of those groups, and who are the writers of the books, who's leading the movement in polyamory, and it's women. It's almost all women, not men.
Wow.
Why do you think that is, Darrel?
Because I think poly liberates women from the patriarchy better than almost any. When a woman could say, look, if I want to have 2 boyfriends, I don't give a fuck what you think. That's my choice. Or 3 boyfriends or 10 boyfriends. I don't care.
You don't own me.
You don't own me. But the reverse has been true for millennia. A guy could have a wife and 3 girlfriends. I mean, it was frowned upon, but he could get away with it. A woman was stoned to death. This is such a reversal of the patriarchy. And I don't want your listeners to think I'm sitting here pushing poly. I'm not. What I'm pushing is ethics in relationships and learn what boundaries are and get out of the Christian straitjacket. And when you do, you'll realize there's a hell of a lot of beautiful things you can do in a relationship that isn't governed by the power dynamics of Christian patriarchy. So that's my sermon for tonight, Cass.
Yeah. Well, amen, brother.
Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
Well, and I think you can probably imagine that I'm, as I hear that you have 1,000 strong member of this group that started 6 years ago, the old school in me just hears swingers club, and I'll probably almost see Dan Aykroyd and Steve Martin. We're too wild and crazy guys. So we're swingers, and let's swap wives. Let's get it on. And it just, I know that and when it comes to this, I mean, human relationships are nuanced to the fucking nth degree, but when it comes to taking your clothes off, it gets even more complicated.
Right.
And so I guess what I'm saying is just my experience with Marie, because she's well read and she's literally experienced with polyamory, and it took me a while to understand somebody who had 2 boyfriends and a husband, and yet if I ever did anything that resembled quote unquote locker room talk or like the moral high ground of ethical just sternness to stay above the fray of like cheap, ugly, disrespectful behavior, objectifying of human bodies. She didn't put up with shit. And so I guess it's to me, it's been this stretch of like, okay, we're talking about people who love sex and love multiple partners, and yet it's just not what the old world taught us that these types of people would be. In fact, I've said this before, I think the people that are prude or are real uptight about sexuality, they are actually the people more obsessed with sex than the people practicing ethical sexuality.
I think most religions, the Catholic Church it's just nothing but sex.
Obsessed with it.
Yeah, and celibacy is sexuality. You can't say, well, that's not sex. Yeah, it is sex. It's a way of expressing sexuality in a very perverted way. And the most perverted people on this planet are priests and nuns, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah. And the reason I would say it's perverted in this sense is because somebody who denies their basic biology is going to come out somewhere else.
Yeah.
So what we see is it comes out in molesting of children in the Catholic Church, for example, or the raping nuns. There's so much that happens when you tell somebody not to be human. That minister in the Baptist church that has raped 6 teenage girls, and this is not uncommon. You can go online and look at stopbaptistpredators.org and see thousands of Baptist ministers. And it's not just the Catholic Church that has this problem. It's every church on this planet. Buddhists have an enormous problem with child molestation.
Did you say Buddhist?
Buddhists.
Oh, wow.
It's a gigantic problem.
Wow.
And the Buddhists have been reluctant to face it, even though, I mean, think about it. You take a boy at 8 years old, and you put him in a monastery and say you got to be there the rest of your life. Yeah, think about that. And then you got adult Buddhist monks around in that same monastery. You don't think some crazy shit's going to happen?
Are there sects of Buddhism that deny masturbation?
Oh, yeah. In fact, the Dalai Lama is very sex negative. Anybody who tells me they love the Dalai Lama, I'm going to ask him, well, what do you think about his sexual? He thinks homosexuality is wrong. He thinks masturbation. Oh, yeah, the Dalai Lama is not an enlightened person.
Nobody is.
So, like, spinning off of this is reminding me of your book, Darrel. I had the intention of getting through it before we were going to interview you today, and then that didn't happen. But I got far enough where this is starting to remind me of that, because you talk about in your book the God virus. How religion infects our lives and culture. You talk about how religion works through what you call vectors,
right?
And even when the vector fucks up and it doesn't do things according to the values of the religion that it's in. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, and then like talk about your book and the 10-year anniversary that you're approaching?
Right. Yeah. This is the 10th anniversary of publication of the God virus and of founding of Recovering from Religion, coincidentally. In the book, you have to first of all understand what a vector is. I use the disease model, and a mosquito is a vector for malaria, for example. And what I say is that ministers are vectors for the propagation of a specific God virus, a Baptist or Catholic or whatever. And it's very specific because it infects in a very specific way. Baptists propagate Baptists. Baptists do not propagate Catholics. So you almost look at these as parasites. If you don't want to use the disease model, you can use a parasite model, because that's what malaria is. Malaria is just a parasite. So you get a parasite infected in your bloodstream, and then the next mosquito comes along and bites you, and then it takes the plasmodium and goes to the next person and gives them malaria. Well, what ministers are doing, or what Jehovah's Witnesses are doing, or Mormons, when they knock on your door, they're trying to propagate their particular parasite. Mm-hmm. Not unlike a virus. I sneeze, and when I sneeze, it makes it puts viral particles out in the atmosphere where your nose can pick them up, and you can get infected. But a vector literally carries the disease. It's not like sneezing. The mosquito literally carries it, or some other insects are oftentimes great vectors. But ministers are vectors of the particular God virus they're infected with, and priests and nuns. And so they're trying to infect you with a specific God virus. And it's very specific, because you've never heard of a Baptist confessing their sins to a Catholic priest. And you've never heard of a Buddhist going to a Baptist minister, to get to nirvana. It always goes through the line of that particular God virus. And that's why I talk about vectors in the God virus, is how they're infecting us. And one of the best ways to infect somebody is through their sexuality. They are going to be sexual. Boys and girls are going to masturbate when they're 12 to 15 years of age. So if you tell them you can't do that, and if you do, you're guilty, then you have to come back to the church to get forgiveness for having masturbated that morning. It's a perfect, I call it the guilt cycle. It's a perfect way to bring people back in to a specific God.
Oh my God. I was in that cycle for decades, Mo.
Yeah.
Jeez. Well, I say decades. By the time I was old enough to masturbate, which by the way, I remember my first orgasm, and it shocked the fuck out of me. It was such a beautiful moment, and I can look at it now with beauty. But at the time, for years I looked at it with shame. But like, obviously, as a kid that's prepubescent, you still rub yourself, and yet here I am rubbing myself. I've never came in my life, and all of a sudden, my body starts feeling something that it's never felt, and shit spewing out of my dick, and I'm like, oh my God, I have arrived. I have arrived. So anyway, that moment was, I celebrate that moment.
That's a good tangent. Thank you for that.
But here's the thing though, is that from that point, because of the Christian mold that I was in, from that point, I have a few girlfriends. I eventually meet the woman who is now my wife. We date for 4.5 years. We're both trying to abstain. And so there'd be like a few months that go by. We find ourselves in a situation where this is not there. Wild horses couldn't stop this thing from happening. So we do it, and then we're like, oh shit. I mean, like probably by the moment I roll off of her or whatever position we're in, We're both just like probably already starting to cry
Yeah.
because of the shame and because of the guilt. And then like the next day we're like, we're like, oh shit, I mean, there was times when my wife and I, who's now my wife, we went to empty chapel and tried to take communion together to just try to like, we got to try something to stop this. And then a month or two would go by and we'd do it again. And because of our courtship or whatever was 4.5 years, it was just a cycle of guilt. And I'm going to sit on your couch for a second, Darrel. We've now been married for 31 years, and we're still trying to disassociate this wonderful act, this wonderful intimacy, to disassociate it from shameful, regretful. It's fucked up, man.
Yeah.
It is.
It is fucked up.
You're right. And it takes years to get through it sometimes.
It does.
Cycle. You talk about a cycle.
Yeah.
It's a treadmill.
And it's abusive. It's abusive that this is what religion does. And if anyone thinks that I'm too angry about religion, let's just start there. Let's start at sexuality.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I want my sex back. I want my life back.
I know.
Well, let me just say what comes to mind here first, Cassis. You're doing the good work in many different ways. You're doing it for yourself, but you're doing it for other people too. So pat yourself on the back here. You probably are learning a lot about your sexuality, and you're learning to access it more frequently and more pleasurably. And the fact that you've been married for 31 years, that's amazing. That's great. That's wonderful. And if you're having to renegotiate or trying to figure out what that means, that's pretty normal too. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
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 Well, and I hope that our listeners can say, okay, I too, my wife and I, or my partner and I are finding ourselves post-religion in an uncharted territory here as to how to re-engage with each other's bodies, with our own bodies. And so I appreciate, not only, I mean, I've patted you on the back enough, but I appreciate your work, but I appreciate the fact that we're having you on right now and that we're elevating this work, we're elevating these books, and I hope people can find a way to access these resources and get some help, because I would think in America it's got to be virtually epidemic.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Religion is an epidemic. And it creates all sorts of problems with our sexuality. One of the reasons I wrote Sex and God was because I saw everybody around me thinks Christian sexuality is the norm.
Yeah.
My undergraduate minor was anthropology. And even in college, I knew that wasn't true, but nobody was talking about it. So after I wrote The God Virus, I got feedback from, I believe it was chapter 5 of The God Virus, which I wrote about sex and God in that book. And I got so much feedback on that one chapter. I thought, well, maybe I need to write a book about religion and sex. And lo and behold, wow, that blew the top off of it.
Yeah.
When I really got in and started researching this book and the anthropology and the culture, the sexual practices of the Manganians in the South Pacific.
Seriously?
Or the Muozo in China, or the Na culture, or the Hadza culture. And I find all these different cultures have a sexuality that is so phenomenally different than anything I ever heard of before. It opened my eyes in many ways to think we have a lot to challenge ourselves. Just understanding the anthropology of human sexuality. And once you do that, I think it's very liberating to realize that there's a lot of other ways to be a human being sexually. And all of them can be ethical, and all of them can be negotiated. And just as an aside, I was on the Left at the Valley podcast last week, and our discussion was on renegotiating relationships. I think if you're in a relationship with somebody for more than 4, 5, 6 years, it's going to have to be renegotiated
I agree.
because the two are going to change. And I think it's possible to positively renegotiate relationships, but nobody talks out loud about it. We were married at 19 or 21 years old, and we took these vows, and they're a contract written in stone for the rest of our life.
Right.
Yeah.
That is fucking bullshit. No human can operate like that. What you're in the process of doing, from what I hear, Cass, is kind of renegotiating your relationship.
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
And you're renegotiating your own sexuality with yourself. I mean, it's you're having a conversation with yourself too.
Yeah. And I know, Marie, that you probably want to address this, but the anthropological view of sexuality and looking at other cultures, maybe even other species, I think, Darrel, and maybe you can have some kind of opinion on this. This is literally just an opinion. At some point in human history, a very insecure moment, by the way, of human history, we wanted to elevate ourselves over the monkeys. And we wanted to say we're better than that. And so we created these lines. And so it is funny, something that Marie and I have talked about on the air many times, as far as just embracing that we're animals, human beings, Homo sapiens, we're animals. We have those same genes that we got from the monkeys. Yeah. And this is what we call it, is like, if you're a no-sayer to what is, then you're saying, nope, I don't have those genes. I don't have monkey genes. I don't have animal genes. And what we're saying is, yes, I do, but I also have a prefrontal cortex, and I also have tools that maybe animals don't, or self-awarenesses that they don't. But at the end of the day, it's okay that I have these impulses. It's okay that I, et cetera, and stop shaming myself for being an animal and saying no to what is.
Right.
That's what I keep coming back to in terms of my own sexual restoration, is the more that, usually pot helps me get there, but the more that I realize exactly what you said, that we are animals, that I can't look in the mirror anymore and see this kind of like supreme being, this individual that is beyond just, I have the same life energy that everything else has around me. Like, I'm nothing special other than, like what you said, we're more intelligent. We have that prefrontal cortex and everything, but we have the ability, our bodies are all physical, made of neurons, made of all the same stuff that everything else is, and we are capable of great pleasure. Like, isn't that fucking amazing that our bodies are capable of just giving us pleasure by just touching a certain part? It's just like someone giving you this machine that will make you waffles just by like pushing a button, and then you get waffles.
Except it's a part of your own body.
I know, but now you've got a waffle maker in you.
Oh, it's awesome.
And all you got to do is push your clit, and then you get a waffle.
Yeah, man. Amen.
And that's evolution did that for you. It gave you a waffle maker. And there is nothing wrong with making those waffles. It's not bad to make them by yourself. It's not bad to add some chocolate chips to your waffles, or blueberries to your waffles, or make waffles with your friend.
Mickey banana pancakes.
Yeah, you can make with your friend, with your husband, and your other couple friends. You can make waffles with whomever you want. It's just super fucking cool that we all have waffle makers. And this metaphor is absurd, but it makes me laugh.
I love it, though.
But the point being, like, it's just so fucking amazing, because it's just like, once you release God from the equation, once you release the idea of like a spirit or a purity or whatever, and you can just be at peace with you being a being of earth material on earth, as a result of evolution and billions of years of all of this happening, and just appreciate this body that we have, this body that we are, and the pleasure that we can feel. It's just, that's fucking overwhelming. That helps me stay grounded and enjoy what I do with my body, and just to be amazed that I can feel these things at all. Like, just this frivolous, recreational, non-discretionary pleasure is it's amazing. And Darrel, you have helped me get there by having that podcast that started those conversations, by writing your books about the God virus and about sex and God. And it's we're coming close to the end of our hour here, and maybe I'll just kind of start closing up by just appreciating you and appreciating the work that you've done, that you have done, that you are doing with recovering from religion. And thank you for the wine that you're going to share with me in 2 weeks. Because I'm coming out there, but this time I'm coming out with my boyfriend, and I'm going to flaunt my poly in front of you. And that just feels like this beautiful, like, circle of beautifulness. Just like, you did this, Darrel. You see this cute boy that I brought with me? You did that. Thank you. Thank you for this boy.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. And yeah, Cass, you may not know it. I know you have Sunday Assembly there in Nashville. But here we have Oasis in Kansas City, which is, similar. In our Oasis, I would say up to 3/4 of the people in Oasis are poly-friendly, and up to 30% are actually poly.
Wow.
It's amazing. When Marie comes to my party and Memorial Day weekend, and anybody else, all secular people are welcome. You can come. Even Christians are welcome, as long as you don't proselytize. You will meet at least a quarter, maybe up to half of the people at my parties are polyamorous. The entire poly group is invited. I invite the poly group, even though some of them are religious. I don't care. But it's so freeing to be able to sit around at my parties and talk about whatever the fuck you want to, and talk about 2 or 3 of my poly partners will be at my party, and Marie's bringing one of hers, and I'll know at least a half a dozen people at my party that will have multiple people there that they're involved with. And it's just beautiful. It's so much.
I'm just cracking up here because the Christian in me is saying, "Well, that sounds like it's going to be an orgy now."
It's not. It wasn't in the fall.
No,
and even if it were, it would be completely consensual and people would be discussing it, and that's the way shit goes, That's a Darrel party for what I know.
There's the Marie I love. She's like, come on now.
Yeah,
keep
consent.
It real.
We're family friendly, and we keep it family friendly. I told people, if you want to have an orgy, you do it in your own tent, because we'll have and it really did offend me about 2 years ago. I woke up, I usually go to bed about 1 o'clock at my parties. And I woke up the next morning and we're serving breakfast. Everybody gets a free breakfast that comes to my party if they're still around on Monday morning. And they were talking about the orgy they had last night. And I said, "You had an orgy last night on my property at my house and you didn't invite me?" And they said, "Well, you were asleep. We didn't want to wake you up." So, that's how disrespectful people are of me sometimes. It just really hurt my feelings. Anyway, we don't have orgies. There's not planned. It's not part of the party.
No. No, and everyone does poly different. Like you said on the episode that we were on together, Darrel. Darrel Ray, you said Darrel Ray's poly is different than Marie's poly. Everything, there might be an orgy, but I'm definitely not interested in joining. So, like, everyone kind of does what they want to do. And that is the whole fucking purpose of, or not the purpose, but that is
it's kind of the point.
That is the foundation of secular, ethical sexuality.
Right.
It's doing what you're comfortable with. It's treating other people ethically.
Right.
It sounds kind of grown up.
I don't want people leaving this podcast thinking my parties are all about sex, because they're not.
No, they're not. They're definitely not.
It's just a lot of fun, and you sit around and roast hot dogs and talk to people, and it'll be 100, 150 people there most years. You can camp out.
Well, I'm going to try to make it. I don't know how I'm going to make it work, but I want to try to make it.
Do it.
Well, we will have, of course, Marie will be there, and we're going to have the Secular Sexuality group from Austin, Texas is coming up.
Awesome.
So I'm hoping you guys can all kind of get together and maybe do some kind of interviews for people. It'd be fun.
Yeah, I would love to do that. There's going to be super fun to be networking and talking to other people about the work that they're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
And As you mentioned, my podcast, I have turned it over. The atheist community of Austin has taken it over. I'm still an advisor, and I can be a host anytime I want. In fact, I was just on it last week. But they're doing it now. They're doing a great job. I appreciate what they're doing.
Yeah, I've been listening. They do a fantastic job.
Different format than what I had, but a lot higher production values.
Yeah, so definitely check that show out. Darrel, so that we can kind of close up real quick, do you want to just quickly kind of plug the things you want to plug?
Well, yeah, people can go find my books, The God Virus or Sex and God on Amazon. They can find recoveringfromreligion.org. And I would, anybody that needs somebody to talk to, who just wants to chat in and deal with some of the issues of leaving religion, they can chat in at recoveringfromreligion.org and just hit the chat button. Or we also have 844 I Doubt It is the phone number if you want to try and call. All volunteer agency, and we need volunteers. If you want to volunteer, you can click on the volunteer button and fill out the paperwork. We'll train you. We'll do whatever we need to help you become successful as a volunteer. And you'll be talking to people literally all over the planet if you're one of our volunteers.
Such a great work.
Last thing we haven't mentioned at all, and I would like to throw this out, and that is we do have a major project called the Secular Therapy Project. And if you need a therapist that's not going to send you back to church and won't pray with you, who's really well-trained and uses evidence-based methods, go to seculartherapy.org and register. It's simple. You can even use an alias. You don't have to have your real name or anything. And you'll be able to search through our database for therapists that will really be able to help you deal with whatever your issues are. And all of them are sex positive, and all of them understand the consequences of leaving religion. So they're
And or if you're a therapist who is secular, go there and sign up.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
Now, they do have to go through a vetting process, and it takes us a few weeks to vet any new person.
Yeah.
We don't put anybody into our database.
Sure.
You really have to show us, that you meet our criteria for talking.
Right.
Good to know. And it's such an honor and a pleasure to have you on. And I can say loud and clear that the world is a better place for you having been here and done this work. And I'm just honored to talk to you and love your work.
Great.
I'm a better person. Not only the world, but I am a better person because of your work, Darrel.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Makes my heart jump. Thank you, guys.
All right, Darrel, thanks for coming on the show. We'll talk to you. I'll see you soon.
All right. Looking forward to seeing you, Marie. And go and give somebody a good orgasm or give yourself one.
Nice.
Thanks, Darrel. So that's our talk with Dr. Darrel Ray. I think that's the most I've ever laughed in an episode. I don't know, especially a 1-hour episode. If you'd like to talk or chat with someone about your own recovery from religion, or if you'd like to volunteer to be on the other end of that conversation, and or you want more information about Recovering from Religion's fall excursion coming up the weekend of September 21st, all these things can be found at their website, recoveringfromreligion.org. The hotline number is 1-844-368-2848. Also known as 1-84-I-DOUBT-IT. My thanks to Marie for co-hosting, and our thanks to Dr. Darrel Ray for coming on and his wonderful work. I hope you enjoyed that conversation, and we'll talk to you soon.